Over the past several months, dozens of landlords have reached out to us frustrated about New York's eviction moratorium. With no real vetting process in place, they're worried that some people are taking advantage of the system to stop paying their rent, while landlords still have to pay the mortgages and property taxes.
Back here is where, when I initially came in, they had this door for some reason bolted or tied shut, and the water was running in the bathtub. I don't know why.
In a now empty downtown Rochester home, Rich Tyson walks me through the damage left behind by one of his tenants. He got a call a few weeks back from the tenant on the other side of the house that the woman in this unit had suddenly left, leaving the door closed and the water running.
What about the water bill?
It was probably about $900, I think.
Wow.
Tyson doesn't like the term landlord because he says it has negative connotations. Instead, he prefers the term housing provider. He primarily rents to lower income tenants, and when the pandemic hit, he knew some of them would be impacted.
I went to all my tenants at the beginning of it and said, let me know if you're having problems, and if you are, we'll find a way to work. If you got to pay me once a week, once every other week, we'll find a way to get through this together.
In August of 2020, a state judge put a temporary ban on all evictions because of the pandemic. Then in December, New York state lawmakers approved emergency legislation banning evictions through May at the earliest. Tyson says that's when some of his tenants stopped paying rent at all.
The people that I'm choosing or want to evict are the people that I know had no interruption in income, people that are collecting SSI, SSDI, some other form of, government, money that's coming in, that are opting not to pay rent. They certainly have the means to, and they're choosing not to.
All the state requires is for renters to fill out a form claiming COVID hardship. They do not have to provide proof that the coronavirus has impacted them financially, while landlords must still pay taxes and mortgages, forcing some of them to sell.
I'm not an independently wealthy person. I can't afford to carry properties on my own when people aren't paying rent. And so I'm selling a number of them now to get ahead of what I think is going to be an unfortunate collapse in affordable housing in Rochester.
The eviction moratorium is not a rent holiday.
Senator Brian Kavanaugh is chair of the New York Senate Housing Committee. He sponsored the eviction moratorium bill.
It's an imperfect analogy, but when we say people can't eat in restaurants, it's not because we don't want them to enjoy a meal, and it's not because we don't want the restaurant to get paid. It's because we're judging it to be unsafe at this time. And that's the same situation with the eviction moratorium.
The concern was that people impacted by the pandemic would be evicted, causing them to go into shelters, further risking the spread of COVID-19. Tenant advocacy groups we spoke with agree it's dangerous to evict people from their homes right now. And in a state with 1 million households unable to pay their rent, Kavanaugh says there was no way to deal with it through the courts.
Is there any sort of process in place to verify if someone actually does have a COVID hardship if they're claiming that to the landlord?
Yeah, the only way to verify hardship would be to allow the court proceedings to go forward. There may be some small fraction of tenants who are not paying rent by choice, but during a pandemic, we don't believe that the courts can function properly and adjudicate 1 million cases.
And that's led to landlord frustration.
My sign says open the courts. I think that's a simple request.
Benjamin Hart came to Rochester City Hall to pay the property taxes on his 5 buildings primarily located in the 19th Ward.
I have my entire, in cash, my entire county tax bill ready to be paid.
Hart had to work several jobs to pay taxes in full.
I had to work for DoorDash. I picked up extra shifts. I work at the YMCA. Used to work at the JCC before we got laid off.
That's because one of his tenants hasn't paid rent in nearly 10 months, owing him more than $8,000. And with no process for evictions, there's nothing Hart can do. But he's tried. These text messages to his tenant show repeated attempts to help him apply for financial assistance. But Hart says his messages go unanswered and ignored, leaving him with no other options but to wait.
I can't force someone to accept help that he doesn't want. He feels emboldened. He feels like, who cares? It's, I have no consequences.
I've lived paycheck to paycheck in my past. It's not a fun spot to be. And I understand the human aspect of it.
For Tyson, he's willing to forgive some of the debt for tenants who have at least tried this past year.
As a housing provider, the last thing I want to do is evict someone. My ideal situation is putting a tenant in a property and they stay there for years.
But landlords' frustrations with the courts and moratorium eviction grows as they feel their power to collect rent diminishes.
Now, Senator Kavanaugh wants to emphasize that people will owe back rent once the moratorium is lifted or risk eviction. He is currently working on a bill to release federal aid that was provided in the last stimulus bill. It's about $1.3 billion dedicated to New York State. We have details of the COVID-19 Emergency Rental Assistance Program and how to apply on 13wham.com.